All right, so here we go. So this is the sixth annual Sportswatch Year in Review. So if you haven't watched this video before, this is DC Rainmaker and I'm DesFit. And at the end of each year, basically for the last 6 years, we basically do this rundown of all the major smartwatch and sports watch releases of the year.
Yep. And so we're starting off from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So it's an order of progression from January until very end of the year. So that's why there can be watches that you repeat effectively the same brand or something like that. So that's just the order they came out in down to the day and hour. In some cases, I think there's one or two that may have had the same day or something like that. So it's so that's the order they're in.
Yep. This is going to be basically a summary of each of these watches in terms of the features that they offered, some of the compelling features that they actually brought to the market, as well as kind of like our opinion on what they did well and what they maybe kind of lacked on. But in terms of actually like full reviews, so we should have full reviews on pretty much all the devices here. You'll notice that we actually kind of lumped in a couple like bonus devices that aren't watches here as well, just because I think they were kind of interesting to
They're wearables.
Yeah, they're wearables. Exactly.
And then in addition to that, we also going to talk a little bit towards the end of the video about what we expect to see next year. And then kind of the overall theme from this year and what went well and what maybe fell a little bit short.
Yep.
And in fact, if you've seen this before, not just on the year in review, but also the FitFile podcast, where we talk about all these watches in depth on like a weekly-ish sort of basis.
Yep, totally. And what's interesting is that the FitFile podcast, I think that was actually kind of the evolution from this, basically. So, I mean, we basically talk about this stuff like all day long through text and stuff like that. So we kind of thought, why don't we kind of extend that concept to, a little bit broader context of like all sports tech in general. So that's our podcast. You can listen to that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube, where you can either see a video version or listen to the audio version.
Yep. And you should be able to find it linked above or below or something like that as well.
Yeah, and then one more thing too is that, we're going to be publishing this on my channel, but we are going to be having more of a general 2024 like kind of big gigantic sports tech year in review, like covering everything from like bike computers to watches to smart trainers to basically kind of everything. So that's going to be like just a huge extravaganza. So definitely subscribe to the channel and check that out as well. So yeah, I think let's just go ahead and dive right into the first watch of the year. So this is the Garmin Lily 2. So this is their follow-up to the original Garmin Lily. So this is their kind of like stylish, fashion-forward. It's basically kind of a smartwatch with good fitness features. So I mean, Garmin is really well known for a lot of the fitness features, and they actually do have a pretty good amount of more like hybrid style watches. So this is kind of bringing something a little bit smaller to the market. So this is their again their follow-up to the original, and this one's interesting because of another watch that comes later on this year, because this watch, I think it brought a lot of updates to the original. That the original was like a really good concept, I guess you could say. And this one just made it a lot better in terms of this one actually has a standard band, so you can actually switch those out. A little bit better like case and whatnot too. Yeah, exactly. But I saw a lot of these actually on people's wrists.
Sure. This is definitely, I think though, from a progression standpoint, a little bit of an in-betweener though, compared to what we see later in the year. And I wonder, as we get to that other watch, if people that bought this regret their life choices.
So did your wife actually wear this for a little bit?
She did for a little bit. I mean, for her, it's tough because she's primarily more of an endurance athlete. So
yeah,
this was nice, but wasn't really what she wants. She wants the full features of the Fenix or whatever series. So, I mean, she did like this. She liked the style in terms of just being small and compact and not super distracting. But as we'll talk about later on, she also really wants a flashlight in those watches, and this does not have that at night. So it's kind of that tough blend of like, there are people that like to wear these sort of watches as sleep trackers because it has all the same sleep functionality as Garmin's higher end units. Like that is exactly the same here. And it's very, very lightweight. So some people we've seen will wear, like a Fenix series watch during the day, but then we'll go ahead and wear this at night. Have a much smaller, similarly with the Vivo, not the Vivo Fit, what was after that? The Vivo Sport, or some of the smaller bands that were very, very thin for kind of that night tracking.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really interesting about this device here is that what Ray was just alluding to for a second there is that a lot of people actually do switch between like two different Garmin devices. So for this, like you could wear it to the office or, like a night out or something like that, and then have a more sport focused watch that isn't necessarily as appropriate in those environments, but all that data kind of switches back and forth. It syncs over, so which is really nice. All my lady friends that actually did try this on and did wear it, they just love the design of this, and they love the size too, quite frankly. I mean, the size, that's something really nice about this watch. I mean, when they put it on, they're just like, I really like this watch quite a bit. But I think we need to talk about like maybe some of the things that it lacked a bit. So the one thing that it didn't have was it didn't have onboard GPS, so you actually had to bring your phone with you to track your outdoor activities.
Right.
And yeah, just in terms of like, battery life and kind of like the sport profiles and whatnot, it was just, I don't know, I think they almost simplified it too much, in terms of like compared to their other more sports focused watches.
Yeah, especially if we get into the other watch later in the year, which is kind of like its sibling, if you will, that had a lot more features and really kicked things up quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah. So anyways, I think, again, I think this was what a lot of people wanted in terms of the upgrades from the original, but not quite everything, because the watch that we're going to talk about later in the year was like really the one to get, I think.
Yep. No, I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's the Lily 2. I think, again, a very interesting watch, but there's another concurrent release that Garmin released alongside the Lily 2. So this is kind of the other side of the
This way.
yeah. So this is going to be one of their completely like completely sports focused products out there. So this is the HRM Fit. And so the HRM Fit is their women's specific heart rate monitor with EKG chest straps, basically. The traditional ones kind of just, went around the chest, and, you had some sort of clasp sort of thing. So this was basically solving a lot of potential problems that women had with traditional heart rate straps, where, women generally have to, wear a sports bra already, and then, to wear an additional strap, it can be a little bit cumbersome,
Right.
Kind of a little bit tough to juggle, I guess you could say, those two sort of things. So with this actually will just kind of clip on the bottom of the sports bra.
Yep.
And they brought all the features from their high-end HRM Pro Plus heart rate strap to this.
Yeah, my wife used it quite a bit last basically winter as right before release, and then again, actually she's gotten to using it more recently as well.
Okay.
Now, admittedly, she's using it more recently because she normally did broadcasts off her watch to her bike computer.
Okay.
And that's been having connectivity issues, so she's gone back to using this because she prefers this over a heart rate strap. And she doesn't like either, like, to be clear, but she does prefer this over that in that particular sense, because it's just slightly easier to use to snap onto a sports bra and just be off and running with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that I think the challenge that we had, and the people that we asked last winter when this came out, was the fact that like the price of this is super high comparative to both a regular chest strap, and a lot of people said like there's effectively a pink tax there, right? And I don't think that's really the case. I think that's just a case of Garmin is known for being very strict on their margins and internally and how they account for costs and stuff like that. And ultimately, they're going to turn a profit on those products. And in the case of the HRM Pro series, that is something that is made in much higher volumes, and thus the costs are going to be lower.
Sure.
And I think there's also mechanically more pieces here.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. So what was interesting, I think, was the initial reception, right, that we got from our testers of this, where one of my testers initially, she liked it, but she was like still okay with a regular chest strap. So it was kind of like, I'm not sure, or she wasn't sure if she'd actually spend extra money on it. The other tester, she didn't really find it great at all, quite frankly. But however, what's interesting is that I've recently passed this along to someone else, and she absolutely loves it.
Yeah.
So quite frankly, it's like I see in the comments, even from some of our videos, that there are some people that, don't necessarily like it, but I'm actually seeing a lot of comments that people that do just love it. So I don't know. I think maybe it just comes down to the individual.
Yeah, I think the other challenge we saw as well is that for that price point, you could have gotten two of the polar Verity Senses, for example, the armbands, optical armbands, which has, I would say, pretty much equal accuracy in the grand scheme of things for most people. So that was a challenge that if you didn't like a chest strap, then this wasn't really necessarily solving all those problems for you compared to an optical armband, from a reputable optical armband, that is, that would be just as accurate, but half the cost. So that's where I think a lot of people kind of looked at this and were like, but Garmin, just give us the optical armband that we all want, right? From Garmin with an Elevate sensor in there. Still, it is solid, it's accurate. It's just pricey, which maybe is the general trend for Garmin devices.
Yeah, no, that very well could be the case. Yeah, very well could be the case. So next up, We have another Garmin, and again, this is just going in chronological order, so this is just the order of how these companies actually release these devices. So this is the Forerunner 165. So this one's an interesting release because I think it simplified the Forerunner lineup a bit. So the Forerunner lineup, it's been a little bit there's been a lot of watches over the years. So they originally came out with their 265 and 965, which were their first AMOLED Forerunner watches. And then their entry-level Forerunner for a long time was the Forerunner 55. And then so this one's the Forerunner 165. So this is bringing AMOLED to a more budget-friendly price. This brought a lot for the money, for sure, at the time. And at the time, for sure, because we had some other watches later in the year that trumped it quite a bit, to be honest with you. So this brought a lot of the features from their mid-range Forerunner 265, which is actually an extremely capable watch, down to this watch. And I think some notable ones is that it has open water swimming, along with all the other regular sport profiles as well. But there's also HRV status in terms of tracking recovery. But then it was like missing some more of those more advanced training logging metrics, like training load and stuff like and training readiness and stuff like that.
You get things like recovery, like you can see there, and you get the HRV status. So you're getting a lot of the 24/7 activity tracking that you would see across all their watches. So that would include blood oxygenation, all the bits are there. But your training load type stuff goes away, and instead you just get basically simple recovery. How many hours until your next workout? I like this watch. I do feel like the waters got really muddy though between this and the 265, right? Like I did an entire video on like, what are the differences there? There's an astounding number of differences that it makes it confusing to some people. But this, I mean, like right now we've seen this on the holidays down on sale for I think $199 or $149, one of the two.
It's at least $199.
Yeah, it's super low price. Like it's an exceptional deal at this price point if you want to get into the Garmin ecosystem and want all the benefits of most of the features as a runner, especially that you get on a 265 without getting things like you said, training readiness and stuff like that. It's sometimes interesting with Garmin watches because they announce at a given price point, right? And you're like, ooh, and then eventually it gets on sale and you're like, dang, that's good, right? And that's where it gets complicated of like, how do you judge a product? Well, this is the retail price, and this will be the majority of the year, right? And I think we'll talk about the Fenix E, for example, right? And how that works. But then now this looks like a pretty solid deal.
With Garmin's basically how they lower the price, it's pretty predictable, to be honest with you. So you know that the initial price that it comes out with, you're like, oh, this one, again, like at the time, I was like, that's a really, really good deal for the money. But, now I think, thank goodness they lowered it because of some of the other offerings that they have in the marketplace. But, something like this, I think this would be kind of an interesting, like back and forth between like a Garmin Lily 2 and this, where, it's like you could use this for the more sports and stuff like that. And then you could have a Lily 2 as kind of more your daily and nightly wearable, quite frankly.
And it's funny though to think about the pricing, right? Those Lily 2 and this are relatively same ballpark-ish price, right? But vastly different feature sets in terms of functionality and stuff. I mean, you can see that in the screens, right? This is a screen that there is no screen until you tap it or wake it up. Otherwise, it just looks like a classical timepiece of sorts. This is an AMOLED display. You can do always on this. Obviously, a gazillion sport profiles on the Forerunner 165 and a lot less here. It's really interesting to see two totally different products. But when it comes to daily tracking stuff, the same metrics under the hood, like the same stuff in terms of all your sleep tracking and HRV, and well, this one's not having, but this HRV and so on.
Yeah, totally. So that's the Forerunner 165 and some of the earlier releases. So next up, let's talk about the Polar Grit X2 Pro. So this is continuing on with their move to AMOLED display. So just for a little history, so late in 2023, Polar shifted to, well, actually they've had AMOLED watches before in the past, but in terms of higher end watches, they were still using memory and pixel transflective displays. But they came out with their Polar Vantage V3, which is their kind of like higher end multi-sport watch in late 2023. And this is, I mean, it's literally a Vantage V3 with a more durable case and a sapphire lens. And I think that's about it, really.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
They did slightly improve the accuracy of the optical heart rate sensor algorithm at that time.
Yeah.
So they improved it and they brought that back to the previous gen.
Mhm.
And they also, I think, slightly tweaked the antenna design on this one. Well, they have to because it's a different case. So
Yeah.
all GPS watches, the antenna for the most part is around the bezel, basically just underneath the bezel. And so every single watch has to have a different antenna design. But they took learnings from that onto this, and that improved accuracy a slight bit over the Vantage V3 through just the antenna. The same chipset underneath the covers, but the actual antenna was different.
Now, one of the standout things I think for both of us on this watch was that so I think there was a version that came with a leather band, right? There's a titanium version, a steel version, or something along those lines. And the titanium version came with this leather band, and that setup, holy moly! It was probably one of the best. I really enjoyed wearing that watch just because it was a really great looking setup. Like
It's super clean.
it's super clean. But I think we do need to talk about the price of this one.
Yep.
And compared to especially the price of the Vantage V3 when that first came out. So the Vantage V3, we talked about that last year in our year in review, where that was in our mind probably overpriced by at least $50, if not $100. And then this one came out and then kind of trumped that even more by increasing the price, I think, by another $150.
Yeah.
On top of that,
Above its previous Grid X price.
no, actually, I'm talking about over the B3, but then even more.
Yeah,
like
more.
way
Yeah.
more. Yeah, over the previous Grid X price. So for the additional materials, I think the additional materials, they can be worth it if you're looking for that durability. But again, like under the hood, this was the exact same watch, even down to the battery. And that was kind of the question that I had in my mind, was that for a watch like this, if it's going to be aimed more at that outdoor adventure crowd, longer battery life really should be there. And that was probably one of my biggest disappointments about this watch, was that.
Yeah, it felt like, as well as get later on, we talk about Polar's last entry for the year, how they're trying to standardize on one software platform. So somewhat Apple-esque in a way.
Yeah.
But I would actually argue even further than Apple, because Apple has some features that are in the Ultra that are not in the base edition, right? For example,
Like
little things.
precision start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in Polar's case, they literally made all three of those watches identical from a software feature standpoint. And I seriously do applaud that. Where they sort of a little bit augured in on the landing is that the price points for these watches don't really align to that as well as they should have. Like, I think the price point for the Vantage M3 is definitely closer to reality.
Very well.
And I think the V3 is offset, but this one here was just a pipe dream of a price. Universally, both reviewers and consumers looked at this watch and went, no, not for that price.
No.
Like you said, you needed to have it's a bigger thing. It should have more battery. And it's like, it needed to have more battery, more something to justify that huge leap in price. Because while people do obviously pay more for certain material finishes, they don't pay that much more for the exact same feature sets.
No,
that's just
definitely not.
yeah.
I think there was one interesting feature that they introduced alongside this watch right here, and I can't believe, you know what, it may have been actually with the B3 as well, but the retroactively changing the heart rate based on like the accelerometer and stuff like that. Yeah, so basically with interval style workouts, what they would essentially look for are any anomalies. So, with an interval style workout, you generally, will peak for X amount of minutes, and then you'll take a rest period, and then, rest and repeat basically. And they would basically look for patterns there and retroactively change that if they saw an anomaly in the pattern. And gosh, like I tested the heck out of this.
Yeah.
And I had one out of like probably a dozen workouts where it actually did do it. And when it did do it, holy cow, it was like you predicted the pattern pretty darn well. Yeah. But the rest of them, it didn't unfortunately predict it. So
that was indeed introduced here, but they did backport it back to the V3. But yeah, same here. I did so many tests and the way we could validate the test was that this had broadcasting. So you could broadcast it concurrently to another device to record the live stream.
Yeah.
And then compare that to recorded stream and see if, and I did like a month of testing of this, of trying a day after day of workouts every single day to see if I could get it to do that. And there was a ton of failures where the watch had incorrect heart rate, but I think only once ever, same as you, like corrected it in my case, it was very, very briefly, but had plenty of other options or opportunities where it could have and never did. So it's interesting though, again, as we look to something like the M3, at least for me later on the year, it seems like Polar was learning for some of these things in ways, right? Yeah. The accuracy was much better for me in the M3. And of course, that's generally true of any lighter watch compared to a heavier watch, right? Heavier watches bounce more, and so it struggles a lot more. But yeah, they want to talk about though that software feature a bit for Polar again more later in the year, because I think we got some thoughts there.
Yep, totally. So another related to Polar device, actually. So this is kind of a bonus, little bonus device that we're going to talk about today. So these are the Sennheiser Momentum Sport earbuds, and you don't necessarily review a lot of earbuds. I do actually, because I love listening to music, when I work out. So I was super interested in these, not just for the sound quality, but also the fact that they actually have a heart rate sensor built into the ear tip right there. So you'll notice these ear tips are actually clear. So that's actually where it can have an optical sensor. So you'll see that tip is actually completely clear there. And it actually can broadcast a heart rate from your ear canal. Now, I think what's interesting is that there's been a lot of studies about the heart rate accuracy from the ear canal where it can be accurate. And I think it can. It absolutely can. But I think just like a lot of optical heart rate sensors, any movement is really going to throw it off. And, that's where with something like this, like with indoor cycling for me, it was spot on. It was totally fine. But I'm talking like any sort of movement, it just got thrown off considerably.
Yeah. I was the same. I didn't have much luck with the optical heart rate sensor being super accurate in my testing either. And it's tough because, like you said, the audio quality was good there. But ultimately, you're paying for the heart rate sensor.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, the reason you buy these over buying something from another brand is that heart rate sensor. And when that isn't there, it's like, well, why did I spend all that money for this? Right? And it's tough.
Well, so when I was just talking about in terms of like kind of like related to the Polar, so this is kind of interesting because this actually integrated with the Polar Flow ecosystem where you actually paired this with the Polar Flow app and use the Polar Flow app to essentially record your workout. So this is where Polar's kind of branching out quite a bit in terms of like licensing some of their intellectual property and kind of like branching out to other companies to kind of leverage that too.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of like paying money for this, right? So I'll tell you, in terms of the sound quality, these are phenomenal. These are actually my top pick for sound quality out of like almost any earbud, and I have a ton of earbuds, and so the price point for these is $330. For a great sounding pair of earbuds, that's up there. I would say these are more like a $280 sort of price. Now, what's super fascinating though is I literally just checked the price on these.
Yeah.
$200.
What?
Yeah. So I guess what's your okay? So at $330, there's that.
Yeah.
So for $200,
You're still throwing away the
heart
rate.
Yeah.
At that point, like I go back to, I would use another brand instead. Like that's in my ecosystem, if you will.
Okay.
Right. So like I find value in switching back and forth with my AirPod Pros.
Okay.
Right? So because it's in my ecosystem, my devices, it's all there.
Okay.
So I'm going to pair this to most likely a phone. Like I don't tend to listen off of the watch as much.
Sure.
Very rarely. So if I'm pairing off of the phone, I still find value of, like in the case of me with the iPhone, having that, it's synced across my devices and all that kind of stuff. And I just find that the connectivity works better overall. My luck there. So it's still a tough pitch to me. Now, if I was Android, that may make maybe easier because I don't have all that portability on that side. But I think I don't know. Also a really big case, by the way.
It's a beefy little.
It's not really a big case. It's just an annoying case because what do you call that?
I don't know. It's just like kind of like really kind of lame flappy door here. It's
Like an elephant trunk.
Yeah,
Just flaws it all over the place.
exactly. Yeah. No, I mean,
I wanted to like them a lot, and I found them like you said, the quality is very, very good, but I don't know if that. In my mind, it's not always just about quality, right? Like there's a whole host of other things you have to trade off on. And if I look at, I even have my AirPod, I do have it in my pocket, right? Like I can't stick that with my wallet in my pocket, right? Like this goes in with my wallet in the same pocket. If you look at the size there, it's a fraction of the size, right? In all dimensions.
Yeah.
So that's just my challenge. I get that those I think sound better than these.
Yeah.
Like I totally understand that. But from a sports standpoint, if I'm throwing away the heart rate, and once you throw away the heart rate, then you're not really getting all the benefits of the Polar Flow platform. As a pair of heart rate strap. So it's a really tough like pitch for me.
Yeah. No, okay. So, in a more realistic world of like someone who just has one set of earbuds, for me being an iPhone user, I would choose a pair of AirPods Pros. I'd like, hands down for sure. In a little bit more opulent sense, if you have more money to throw, I'll give you my rundown just because again, like I do own a lot of earbuds for my like everyday drivers. And quite frankly, honestly, if I had to choose just one set of earbuds, if I had to choose one, it'd be a pair of AirPods Pros. However, for me, I use AirPods Pros as, more like general use, daily drivers. I'll even use them for running. I won't use them for cycling at all. For cycling, I actually use a pair of Shox Open Run Pro 2s.
Outdoor cycling.
Outdoor cycling, yep. Just because those are open ear, so I can actually hear my environment. Those are phenomenal. And those actually were released this year too. I don't have them here, but I do have a review on these. But for more like gym use and running and whatnot, I love these just because again, the sound quality is there. They do have a wingtip as well, so they're going to be more secure than the AirPods Pro 2s. But I don't know, at $200, I actually think they're not bad for $200. I mean, like even if you're not buying these for heart rate, $200 for the sound quality of these, really good.
Makes sense
for sure. Cool. All right, cool. Next up, we have the COROS Vertix 2S. So this basically it's a pretty modest update to the COROS Vertix 2. It's basically what they call an S upgrade. So they basically upgraded the heart rate sensor, and then they also, made some changes to the GPS antenna as well, or the GNSS antenna. And I think a lot of it actually was their story. I mean, they literally just told us that the story behind these were kind of like the new colorways and whatnot too.
Yeah.
So, and do you remember? I can't remember what the CEO called the S. Like, what did he say the S stand for? Super?
It was something silly. Like
Yeah,
it was like
something silly.
it was one
They
of
even
those.
laughed about it. Yeah, they even laughed about it too. But I found it certainly a lot more accurate than the previous version. Yeah, in both heart rate as well as GPS.
Yeah, they talked about how when we saw this with first COROS Vertex, one, but also really the two, they were kind of on, in the case the two, that was a first multi-band watch. And so in that case, their multi-band was not awesome in their first generation watch. And to be fair, a lot of companies struggled with that. And then we saw them really improve that in the COROS Pace 3, where they like really stuck the landing on multi-band. And so it made it tough for COROS, where you have this 200-ish small dollar watch basically beating easily the accuracy of their whatever the Vertex 2 cost at that point in time, like something or so. And so that was a really tough like proposition. And this basically brought that back in line, where you had not only the more accurate optical heart rate sensor, but also again that more accurate GPS as well. But otherwise it wasn't like a huge, like you said, it was a minor upgrade to essentially placehold, right?
I think it was an update. It was like an update.
Yeah. So, and we see that with a lot of these companies. We see that in a number of watches here, where companies aren't necessarily releasing watches assuming you're going to upgrade from the Vertix 2 to the Vertix 2S. They're doing it because they want to basically put a milestone or marker in there and say, we have a new watch as of 2024 that is this, right? As opposed to having the Vertix 2 would have been 2022.
Yeah, something
like that.
Yeah.
I think August 2022, somewhere in that range, sir. And so if people are comparing things like, oh, that watch is 2 years old and this watch is, but if you see this at 2024, you're like, oh, it's a new watch, right?
Yeah.
I'm not picking on COROS. That's
No.
all these companies. I mean, that's what Apple does. That's what Garmin does. Every single company here does that. And this is really that placeholding with the newer dates on that device release with very minor updates to also, again, make sure that they're not having a case where their Pace 3 is slaughtering their top-end watch with accuracy.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting trend that we saw last year, and I think that trend is continuing this year too, is that, I think the expectation for a completely brand new version of a watch every single year, I think that's getting tougher and tougher, just because I think the technology is getting pretty darn good at this point, where it's going to be hard to, create something completely new every single year. So yeah, I think it was smart for them to call it a 2S because again, it's not meant for a Vertix 2 owner to upgrade to a 2S. It was meant for somebody who owns a 3-year-old, I don't know, like Apex or something like that, to say it's like, oh, well, I really want a Vertix. But the 2's been out for a little while, so it's like now, oh, okay, the 2S is like it's current-ish, so.
And I think there's some benefit to consumer there, assuming the goal was not to drive you to upgrade to the next version. Assuming the company is doing software updates behind the scenes, which we certainly see in the case of COROS or Apple and to a degree Garmin, but Suunto as well. If the companies are releasing new watches and then giving that 1 year prior still those updates from a software standpoint, minus anything that's limited by hardware, which is what we see with Apple and Samsung, for example, then I'm all right with that, right? That way, you've got current stuff. And obviously, these companies really want to have annual releases for all sorts of monetary reasons. But I think as long as they're finding a balance there and how they do that, that's probably all right.
Yep, totally. All right, so next up, I think this was probably one of the most exciting releases of the year for me. So this was the Suunto Race S. And so Suunto made a pretty big splash with their original race that was released in 2023 because it brought a lot of premium materials. It brought a lot of this new software and whatnot that came out with their Suunto Vertical the year before to a really, really well-priced watch. This one blows it out of the water. Like, just completely blows it out of the water. So I think it's what, 340,
349.
349, which I mean, for what you're getting out of this watch, it's a really, really good deal. I mean, you're getting offline maps. It has an AMOLED display just like the original race. It just like the S name. What the S price really stands for small on this one. And then it also came with I would say it's more accurate than the original. Well, actually, I would say much more. Was it like phenomenally, was it like an amazing heart rate sensor? Not necessarily, but it was substantially better than the original race, which I did not find usable at all.
No, you win. It is substantially better than the original Suunto Race or Suunto Vertical or any other Suunto heart rate sensor in the last half a decade, which were dumpster fire status. And this elevates up to mostly acceptable. So this is a great little watch. And that same trend though of Suunto basically saying, hey, we're going to give you all the same software features as our higher end watches, but here is a smaller package, so it's smaller battery life. And then of course, smaller size as well. But this is a great watch and great GPS accuracy as well. Like
one of the best, actually.
Really, really solid. They've really nailed this watch. The one downside I have with this watch and really, I think all Suunto's offerings lately is that they've done an exceptionally good job at making all these extra apps, right?
Yeah.
Lots and lots of Suunto apps. But those apps are still plugins that you have to select and they take up slots. You only get so many slots, just a couple slots. And they really need to start making things built into the watch natively. So they added like a Climb Pro style function to this, which good job. Is it as advanced as Garmin's? No, but it's really close and does the trick. Like it's definitely better than COROS doesn't have one or Polar doesn't have that same sort of thing. So great job there, but that really needs to be baked into the watch as opposed to being like all these little add-ons and
guides and
they've made like, we're talking like, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 by now. And they're all really good. But just pick the best ones and stick them in the watch. I don't mind if some of the extra guides are extra, that's fine. But they did the work for those. I get why. The reason why they don't want to do that is that it reduces increases their time for a lot of the QA and quality assurance processes because it's something they can do faster if it's just considered like a plugin versus when it's built into the core firmware that adds a lot more. But I think it's kind of frustrating to people that they can't just have it natively there, especially when you start a activity and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to enable the Climb Pro like thing, or I forgot to enable this thing. It's like, oh, I just wish I could add it on the fly.
Yeah. No, I think Suunto really did a good job with their UI redesign on their watches, where I think it makes a lot more sense now. And they made a lot of improvements on the speed of the watch in terms of the processor and getting around too. But I think there's still some quirks on the software side of things that make it a little bit frustrating, such as like the guides and whatnot. There's like sensor pairings.
Sensor pairings still bad.
Yeah, sensor pairings.
You only pair one sensor type at a time, right? So like you can't have, 2 power meters or like a trainer and a power meter or stuff like that. That kind of stuff is just frustrating.
Yep, totally. So next up, we had kind of have like 2 different releases all in one. So Samsung came out with their new Watch 7 as well as their Ultra, and the Ultra is ultra interesting for sure. So with the Watch 7, this was interesting as well because Samsung has this kind of history of lately they're skipping generations in terms of the physical rotating dial, which has been like, that's like a very, very popular feature amongst Samsung loyalists for sure. And then with the Watch 7, they skipped it again when they had that on the sale. But once again, like absolutely beautiful watch. In terms of new features and whatnot, a few like there's like new FTP detection for cycling. There's a little bit longer battery life, and there's like dual frequency satellites systems in this as well, and then better heart rate accuracy. And these watches were some of the first, I think, that we've been like, oh, dang, this is actually pretty decent at this point. Yeah. And well, I guess what was interesting though is that there was a little bit of a difference between accuracy between the Ultra and the 7.
Notably,
from our testing. But once again, like, in terms of like the actual design, once again, like I really have to give it to Samsung, at least for the Watch 7. I'll give them for that it's just an absolutely gorgeous watch.
Yeah, I really like the Watch 7. I think the little touches in the band nail it. Like those little color accents, I really like. So I was pretty happy with this. Accuracy wise, was a bit rough though for me in some cases on GPS, where just was like really drunk uncle-ish here and there, but overall pretty good. Heart rate though was better than my GPS side of things, so that was good. And even battery life, I did it was like a 9 or 10 hour day on the mountain, up in the mountains outdoor riding, and it hung in like no problems. The entire power meter thing with FTP is a hot mess, like in terms of you have to use the Samsung phone app. You have to pair your power meter to the phone. You have to hope the phone maintains a connection with this, which it won't. It doesn't ever more than like 10 or 15 minutes. It's mostly completely garbage. But I'm hoping they continue that trend. Like I'm hoping they continue that line of thought and go, okay, what we did with the FTP bits and the power meter on this was unquestionably bad. But maybe in 2025, we'll see them bake it in natively like Apple does and like Garmin does and everyone else except for basically not Fitbit, but Google now together. So maybe we'll see them jump over into that realm, which would be cool.
Now, the most interesting thing about the cycling FTP detection is, again, that you have to like use your phone to do that with the power meter, which again, for, I don't know how many year at this point, these watches still don't have external sensor support. And like, it's very strange for me to come out with FTP detection and not have external sensor support. It's like, it's one of those like, I think we've certainly talked about how Samsung likes to boil the ocean with their watches. And it's like, I think that's another thing that they're trying to do here, but they kind of skipped over a step there.
Well, they boil the list, the marketing list, right?
Yeah.
They build that ocean, but they don't actually do the work to boil the real ocean, right? They never finish the thing, right? They're like, yes, we've checked off this. And you're like, did you actually check off that?
So they like put the pot on the oven, turn it on, and I forgot to put water in it. They got, like, what?
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
And yeah, because that was one that they highlighted. They talked about that for a number of minutes, like 2.5 minutes in their keynote. They talked about FTP, and then going out and they're trying, and it's like, this is arguably one of the worst implemented things Samsung's done on a watch in a long time, which is for Samsung, actually a pretty impressive bar to clear. And so that's where I don't understand sometimes. And there are other companies guilty of that same thing, of putting in features that you're like, what? Why did you do it that way? That was just not a good idea. So anyways, yeah, so that's probably a good transition though into the Ultra.
Yeah, the Ultra. So this is a fascinating watch because, I mean, Samsung, I mean, they I don't say they copied the name, because Ultra's been on some other watches too, but yeah, I mean, but
so big. I forget how big and heavy it is. Holy cow.
It's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big one.
This is the Fenix E on the side, just for reference.
Yeah, totally. So there certainly was a lot of talk about how it was an Apple Watch Ultra clone. And, you have the name, first of all, but the case, I don't think that's a clone of the Ultra.
No.
I don't think that's a clone of the Ultra. Yeah. But the themes, like there's the design themes around like the orange and the bands, especially, that was kind of a blatant copy of like the Ocean band, the trail band, and the I can't remember the trail, the Alpine. Yeah. So
identical copies.
Those were like, I'm sorry, but those were like super identical. The case, no, that's absolutely unique for sure. But this brought actually some really, really good battery life. And again, I think from both our perspectives, this was by far the most accurate Samsung that we've ever tested.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, like before, I haven't necessarily given Samsung passing grades in terms of accuracy.
No.
This one, I can recommend the watch.
Yeah, this, from an accuracy standpoint, this sticks the landing. Like I mean, as always, we can quibble with little things, but on the whole, accuracy is not an issue on this watch.
No.
GPS or heart rate for the most part as well. And so, yeah, I did a bunch of stuff in the mountains on this, and both the battery life stood up, which was notable, as well as having the accuracy be there in deep in the woods and stuff like that with no problem. So kudos to Samsung for finally sticking the landing on accuracy on this one.
So what were your thoughts about like the implementations about like their version of the action button versus like an Apple and whatnot? I mean, there were so many similarities.
A lot of
with it there.
It's very similar. I mean, I know like it upsets fanboys on either side of the aisle depending on how you compare it, but yeah, like I agree with you that the case design doesn't really remind me all that much of Apple's in the grand scheme of things, but the color accent styles, and I know people say there's been orange before. Really? And then the bands being the three bands styles being named almost identically, right? And then the styling of the bands being almost identical. And say like the whole imitation and flattery thing, but I feel like Samsung could have done a little more on this to make it more unique. The other bands that I have for as well are nice. Like I'm not going to say that the bands that they made aren't nice, but they are just complete duplicates.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But no, I think setting that aside, and that's an entire like internet war unto itself. From an implementation standpoint, I mean there are again plenty of things that Apple copies from Samsung and Apple back and forth. So we're not saying that doesn't exist. I'm just pointing out this. We don't want a whataboutism, right? But this is a case of like this was copied, and we can talk about things later on that are copied on the Apple side, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Anyways, good job on this Samsung in terms of delivering that. And at a price point, they did undercut Apple as well, right? That's a lower price point than that, which is positive. It has cellular baked into it as well at that price point, just the same sort of thing there. So I think that's all good.
It makes me really excited for what Samsung is going to have for next year. It makes me really, really excited because I think that, again, I think at this point, I'm very, very hopeful that the accuracy will remain the same, and they'll actually maybe refine some of the features that they actually have on board, and like maybe bring external sensor support and stuff like that.
Another one, that same realm, would be the navigation side, right?
Yeah.
So on one sense, Samsung has better navigation than Apple does in terms of bringing in files and things like that. It is better than what Apple does. Apple's are entirely tied into the Apple Maps side of it, and if you can't create it in Apple Maps, and there's lots of reasons you can't, we can talk about later on, then you're out of luck. In Samsung's case, you can pull those things in there, and you can create them, but the entire experience is kludgy, right? And so it's just not awesome. Again, it's kind of that refinement thing that we see Samsung checking the box, but not really refining it. Apple's is refined in a different way, and equally frustrating in a different way, but it's different sort of stuff there when it comes to navigation. So I would like to see, like you said, better sensor support next year, and navigation for a watch that they, same with Apple, talked about kind of being the ultra thing in the outdoors and all that. When it comes to navigation, neither of these watches are really great out in the outdoors navigation with their native apps anyways.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd like to see too is that there are differences in the navigation features between the 7 and the Ultra as well, where the navigation features between these two are extremely similar. So
they're basically identical. Yes, there's no navigation at all in the base.
So I'd love to see some parallels with that there too, because these two watches, it's very much like the Ultra and the Series 10, where there are distinct hardware differences that count for the cost, basically, at that point. And I think if they could actually make the software parallel between these two, I think that would be really compelling.
Cool.
Yep. So next up, we have the new Suunto Ocean. So I'm not necessarily a diver, so I'm probably going to let you take this one for the most part. But so this one, they kind of squashed a vertical with the race, and then made a dive computer. Is that right?
Exactly. So Suunto has a very long history of being a dive computer company over the years. And they've gotten closer and closer with their dive computer watches to being similar to their non-dive computer watches, right? So Suunto as a company has always really had 2.5 divisions. They've had their sport watch division. They've had their dive computer division, which, back in the old days are like much more what you think of as a legacy dive, analog type dive computer. And they've had their compass division. As silly as that may sound, it's always been like a thing they've done. And so this is really, I would say, the first time they've solidly stuck the landing on having a well-designed device here that is equal to, as you noted, their Suunto Race and a kind of vertical-ish series, but as a dive computer in one with an AMOLED display. That's the key bit there. And so this is designed to compete with not just the dive functionalities of, Apple and Garmin's Fenix 8, but really designed to compete with any other Garmin Descent series dive watches. And it's impressive. Like they've done a really good job here. I haven't had a lot of time on this watch, unfortunately, yet. That's something that's going to happen here soon, where I want to compare this with really the Fenix 8 from a dive standpoint and talk about what those differences are, because there are some nuances there, and some of them matter to some people and some of them won't matter to other people.
Well, so that was what I was doing a little bit of research on this watch just because, again, I'm not really a diver. And for me, I was looking at the price point of $899, and it seemed like it offered a lot of dive functionality for $899, like compared to, a lot of the more capable dive computers, even like the Descent series being around that like $1,500 mark. And this has multi-gas,
Yeah, so this has air integration. It's something that like the Fenix 8 does not allow for air integration. That you have to jump in the Descent series. So you can do air integration directly with this, which is pretty cool with the Suunto Pod. So those are some of the differences there where that matters to some people, but not others, right? So like if you're a recreational diver that dives on vacation once a year, you don't care about air integration because you're going with the dive group and they're going to handle all that for you behind the scenes from an instructor standpoint. And you just want to record it on your watch. So that the Fenix 8 is great there, et cetera. And same with the Apple Watch Ultra. But if you're more a frequent diver, then having the air integration is probably a bit more important for you. And to be able to have this watch be everything, that's pretty nice. And then the other big thing, of course, being that the max depth of this is 60 meters from a dive standpoint. These are all rated much higher than that, but in terms of what it'll track, both Garmin and Apple are topping out at 40 meters. This one goes to 60 meters, which is pretty cool. And Suunto does this whole like underwater dive map thing where they use the entry and exit points and accelerometer and the gyro on this to make this underwater dive color profile picture. It's just cool. And let's be honest, like that, I'm all about cool things.
I was going to say from a 3D standpoint, I bet that would be really, really neat to see.
It's super cool. So I think this is a super cool watch. I love seeing Suunto price it appropriately, and be very, very competitive, and obviously undercutting the Fenix 8, which will come out about 3 months later or so.
I kind of like that they're actually merging their, more dive computers and their more sports watches kind of, into one with this one. So I'm curious to see like how much more integration we're going to see with their other watches. They've actually had their like mermaiding profile right before with their other ones, which is basically snorkeling. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we start to see that trickle down to their like vertical 2 or race 2 or something, whatever they end up going out with. So yeah, talking about new releases. So we actually have the new Google Pixel Watch 3, and we finally got a bigger size with the Pixel Watch 3. So they did make an update with the smaller version. So that one is where they did increase the actual display size just a little bit. But other than that, the small version is virtually the same from a hardware standpoint. There's a lot of exciting stuff we need to talk about from the hardware or the software standpoint, pardon me. But we finally did get the bigger version of the Pixel Watch that I think a lot of us had wanted for a long, long time. And, the one thing I have to say about this watch is that from a comfort standpoint, this is such a comfortable watch to wear. Just like the lines and the curves and stuff like that, it just feels great on the wrist. So it's not just larger, but, it's also a very, very comfortable watch too. But then they actually increased the battery life on these as well. And that was both a combination, I think, of some like, efficiency upgrades with some hardware, but there was also some efficiency upgrades with Wear OS 5 on here as well. However, with Wear OS 5, there were a lot of exciting features that came out that I don't think either of us are expecting, quite frankly, on the sports and fitness side of things.
So with that update for these watches, the Google ones, you have the cardio load and the target load. So the idea now that basically training load in a Fitbit/Google Watch, which is pretty cool. So it's going to go ahead and look at any activities that are heart rate driven. So it's not limited to just running, for example, or cycling. It's any sort of workout, and not even limited to an actual workout, right? It's if you are going to go and run down the street after a bus, and you run a ways down the street anyways, and you raise your heart rate in that, it's going to count that as effectively training load, which is really, really cool because there are plenty of cases for people where they may accumulate lots of high heart rate fatigue, if you will, during the day that most companies don't account for. And so this does a good job of accounting for that, even if you don't start a workout for that particular thing. So you can imagine, like, if you're in construction, if you're in lots of scenarios where you may be sweating it out during the day, but not actually hitting a workout, that's still fatigue on your body. So this does a great job of capturing that. And then with that, they then establish your target load. So that's the load for the day that they think that you should target if you want to either maintain or improve your fitness. And you have a choice between those two settings of, do you want to keep your fitness as is, your baseline effectively, or do you want to increase that to be, to get faster or stronger or whatever you want it to be? So I don't think we expected that from Fitbit, Google. No, I know neither of us expected that. And it was cool to see them implement that. And I think they did a better job implementing that than what we'll see later on with Apple in terms of the granularity there.
Yeah.
For at least sports geeks like us, I think maybe more mainstream people that aren't really into that training stuff, will prefer the Apple approach. But for me, I'm like, this Google nailed it. Like they really stuck that landing on that there.
Yeah, and I think kind of just to back that up a little bit in terms of like why you would necessarily want to track this load. If you want to actually increase your fitness, you don't want to like ramp up too quickly, basically. So it's like you want to kind of measure the load on your heart, and basically in terms of like heart rate zones over time, and you kind of want to track that over a longer period of time, so you don't like peg out too much, or again, like maybe you actually kind of want to maintain that same load just to kind of maintain your fitness. So that's what they're kind of aiming for with that. But the target load feature kind of aims to give you some guidance about the next day, and this is going to be based on both your previous training as well as your recovery as well, so in terms of your readiness and whatnot too. So and then they actually, talking about readiness, they actually made some improvements on that as well, where they're actually taking in more factors, including like HRV, into the readiness score. And again, that's all going to kind of like feed into this whole holistic system right here. But
and making it free.
So
they've basically gutted in a good way.
Oh, yeah.
Their premium offering and made it so there's really no point in buying premium anymore unless you wanted like some of the very hyper specific coaching type workouts, which I think is a good thing. I've often noted with Fitbit and Google that Fitbit Premium has cost them untold millions in revenue.
Completely.
Well more than I'm sure they're making on Fitbit Premium. I think they've realized that, because the conversation up until now has always been, oh, but you need Fitbit Premium for that. You no longer need Fitbit Premium. It's hard to say that over and over again for really anything as a daily factor in this watch. It just works out of the box without that. And that daily readiness score, now just called readiness score, they brought back free to all existing Fitbit users as well. So it's not just this watch owners going forward.
Yeah, I think that was a comment that I saw, and probably you saw in your reviews over the years, is like, well, it's like, I'm not going to buy this because subscription, because people, we all don't like subscriptions for stuff like that. So I think they got the point on that, and I'm really, really happy to see that. I mean, I think that's an incredibly smart move from Google. And that's
absolutely. And the last thing they did is add a bunch of running efficiency metrics as well.
Another surprising thing. Right?
Yep. So they spent a lot of time on that. They, I was there and they showed me their labs for that and how they captured that and validated that. And all that's super cool. The one downside I would say though is I did all this work on showing me all this cool stuff, but we can't export any of those running metrics out of the Fitbit platform, right? So I can't actually cross-compare that to other known good data sources. Like, I believe them that they're accurate. I generally do. I saw how they did it, and I understand how they did it. I believe they're accurate, but I still want to prove it, right? I want to show it compared to other sources to see how that works, and I can't do that. Also, no running power. Do I think that's a big deal? No, but they went that far down the road. Like, I think there's probably more benefit for most people in running power than like some of the running efficiency metrics today. That's just my guess there.
Yeah, I think, from our sports reviewer lens, I think these are great devices, but from our personal perspective, in terms of like how we want to use them and how we want to review them and how we review them, there's some kind of headaches there associated with that, like, such as the fact that there's certainly some hoops we have to jump through to actually get data out of the watch and whatnot too. But, we definitely express those opinions. So, but yeah, hopefully we'll see some improvements there. Again, huge surprises there. So they are on, again, I think a really good path, just like Samsung at this point.
And we can maybe talk about future paths down the road, but I would say for Google in particular, I really want to see their path next year include a ultra style device, a bigger device, right? I think these are nice devices, but for a lot of people, they're just not big enough, right? They're still, and not that people need like a really big chunky watch, but I mean, if we look at something like the Suunto Race S, it's like the smallest watch they make, right? This is basically the same size as that, right? It's pretty much identical. And I think there's a lot of people that just want a more robust device. Like you look at the Samsung, this is the 40.
That's the bigger one.
The bigger one, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this easily goes over the top of that as that. And that's not even talking, of course, the Ultra, right? Which just, and I guess this was bad there, but either way, it's about a wash there. And then over here, this, of course, well, that just pancakes everything on this table, but still, it's, people want a bigger watch.
And I think related to that too, I think maybe people want a more unique looking watch too. As comfortable as it is, and seriously, it's probably one of the most comfortable watches on this table to wear. I think it could do better with a more unique design that stands out, because I think that's something that people do want. So I think that's actually a big reason why a lot of people go with the Ultra versus like just like a regular Apple Series watch. Is that Series watches aren't bad looking watches, just like the Google Pixel 3 isn't a bad looking watch either, but they want something actually a little bit more unique looking, maybe a little more rugged or something along those lines.
And I think that's something that Google has to look at. They're delivering on the software here with this watch, right? They're delivering on the new upgrades, they're delivering on the updates, but they need to stop and ask, like, why hasn't the Pixel Watch caught on yet? Given how big Google's presence is, why isn't it a bigger part of the overall wearables conversation? Like, I feel like people talk a lot about a lot of other options here, but the Pixel Watch always kind of ends up being like second fiddle. And it seems like it's a much further second fiddle than the Samsung watches are. And we see that in lots of different metrics, right? Mostly just views, and not just our channels or our written reviews, etc. It's just, if I look at the interest level of a Pixel Watch to a Samsung watch, two things with a relatively similar audience, it's not even close. We're talking like, I don't know, 30 to 1, 50 to 1, right? And why? Right? Like that's tough for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it just comes down to the design, because in terms of execution, in terms of software execution, I would hands down have to give it to Google over Samsung. But in terms of industrial design, I'd have to give it to Samsung hands down over Google.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, all right, yeah. So that's the new Google Pixel Watch 3. Next up, we kind of have this quadfecta.
I liked your Giggle Watch though. That'd be way better.
The Giggle
Watch 3.
So next up, we kind of have this quadfecta of Garmin releases here. So the highlight is going to be the new Fenix 8s. So there's two different ones here. There's an Enduro 3, and there's also a Fenix E. So to start out with, so the big news with the Fenix 8s is that the Epix series has gone away. So historically, Garmin's had their Epix series, which is their AMOLED versions of their Fenix. And then their Fenix lineup was their memory and pixel display outdoor focused sports watches that they had for years and years and years. They finally merged those into one lineup with the Fenix 8. So we have the Fenix 8 regular or AMOLED over here, and then we have the Fenix 8 memory and pixel solar version over here. So other than actually combining those two lineups into one, there's some pretty big changes internally here. So they've completely redesigned the cases on both of these, where these have what they call their new leak-proof buttons. It's a completely sealed-off case, which actually allows for recreational dive functionality on these watches. So very, very interesting addition. But on the kind of completely opposite end of the scale, these also have a microphone and speaker, which are brought over from their Venue series of watches. So these allow a lot of features on the smartwatch side of things in terms of like taking calls. Let's see here. There's like, you can access your voice assistant. You can take voice notes and stuff like that too.
But no cellular. And to be clear, there's no cellular in these Garmin watches, unfortunately. So you still need to have your phone with you for those calls and things like that. But yeah, it's cool to see the dive features integrated into this. Something Garmin's had their Descent series for a while now. So it's nice to see that. And I think, the element of that is also matching what others have done with adding dive features, not just them, but Suunto as well, into that kind of cheaper portfolio of devices.
So what's your opinion, I guess you could say, on the fact that, I mentioned it in one of our podcasts actually before, that, in a way, this was almost like Apple ultrafying a Fenix in a way, because the Apple Watch Ultra had recreational dive functionality, and it does also have a speaker and microphone and stuff like that. So do you feel like that's actually going to be kind of pulling over that crowd a bit from the Ultra?
I think a very small number of people. Okay, I think the problem is that, like, the speaker microphone bit there, one, it's not awesome, right? In terms of the quality of that is not awesome. It's nowhere near what Apple's delivering in their speaker mic combination there. And then two, you still have to have your cell phone, right? So for the people that do want to, the kind of infamous Apple scenario they showed in their keynote of someone surfing, right, where they don't have their phone, they have their watch, they can talk on the phone, talk on the watch via you get the point, right?
Yeah.
Out on a surfboard. That can't happen here on the Garmin side. So there are people that talk to their watch. I will admit, I am not a person that talks to any of, well, I yell at my watch all the time, but me and my watches do not have a conversation, right? You know, I do not talk to people through my watch. I cannot do that. I can't walk around an airport like Inspector Gadget talking to my watch like this. It just doesn't. It's not me. Kudos if you can do that. I can't.
The only reason I talk to my watch basically are to take, or I'm sorry, not to take notes actually, but to set alarms and timers. That's literally the only reason I talk to my watch, and that goes for an Apple Watch or the new Fenix 8 as well. That's the only reason I use the actual microphone on there. The speaker, it's like it's a nice to have, but it makes it a little bit more friendly. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. I guess it really is going to depend on how you use your watch if you're going to be able to utilize those features. But I think that adding the dive functionality, it's kind of like the Suunto Ocean here, right? Where it's allowing people to not necessarily have to spend money on like a full featured dive computer, and all they're going to be doing is like recreational single gas diving.
Right, exactly. So down to 40 meters, which covers almost 95% of the dives people do out there at least. And that's what recreational divers would be doing. And yeah, the dive functionality is great. It's very similar at that core level to what they have on the Descent series, with you know, very few trade-offs whatsoever. It works. I've got a lot of dives both in this watch as well as other watches, and this is totally fine for my diving needs. But I think that does get to the question though of, you know, in the case of these watches here, Garmin increased the price quite a bit over the past Fenix 7 Pro series, and Epix Pro series. And outside of adding diving, both from a feature standpoint and the hardware that supports that, the depth gauge and things like that, and adding the speaker and mic, both of which are on cheaper Garmin watches, right? So like their Descent G1 has effectively the same dive features, and that costs almost a little under half the price, right? And then the Venue series that cost a third the price essentially has a speaker and mic series. So it's, or speaker and mic features. Beyond those two core things, they didn't add any other sport features to a watch that is so closely aligned with Garmin as a sports brand, right? This is their flagship watch. And at the end of the day, there were no new sports features. They rearranged the deck chairs in the UI, which parts of it I like, but the vast majority of it I am not a fan of. And I feel like there's a lot of people that would have said, or they did say, like, if Garmin wanted to increase the price, cool-ish. But very few people in this world dive, right? Like we're talking probably 1%, my guess is, of Fenix owners are going out and doing diving with it. At least current generation of Fenix owners anyways, part of this. And then the feedback has been overwhelming that a lot of people don't really care about having those smartest features on this watch, right? Of the current owners anyways. Now, will it pull in maybe more Apple people like you mentioned earlier? Perhaps, but I think Garmin, it could have gotten away with that price increase because they hadn't really increased the price in a number of versions of the Fenix now, if they had delivered some sort of new marquee sports features that their existing customer base goes, oh yeah, I want the Fenix 8 because it has this cool new sports thing. And that to me was probably the biggest like disappointment here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I completely have to agree. I mean, they are certainly setting a template, I guess you could say, for the future with these, but that template I think is costing a bit for consumers at this point.
Especially if you look at the template that Apple has, right? Like they do minor updates each year to their hardware, like very minor, and a couple software features that come along with that. And then they have the WatchOS slide, which brings in lots of software features each version. But the price is staying the same each year, right? That's the core thing that almost all these, Samsung does the same thing. Their prices stay the same each year. They bring in new features, and a lot of these companies do the same thing. And if you are going to increase the price substantially, like we saw a couple of companies doing, like in the case of Polar, well, they increased the price and didn't really add much weight new features. But a lot of other companies will increase the price, add new features to compensate for that. And we saw Garmin kind of not do that. And that's where people were really turned off by it.
Yeah, I think related to price too is that, you know, the thing that we actually saw this year is that the memory and pixel watches actually got an increase. You know, in terms of memory and pixel to memory and pixel watches, those actually got an increase comparatively, basically across the board. So that's where their solar versions increased by how much? I can't remember exactly. Yeah, it was quite a bit. But I think another interesting thing is that they actually killed off the small version, the Fenix 8 solar version. So yeah, there's basically only a 51 millimeter version as well as a 47, but the 42 is gone at this point.
Much to my wife's chagrin. She is a MIP screen, I don't say diehard, but a strong believer of the MIP screen. And she's been on the Fenix, small series throughout all the different iterations. And she has been using the Fenix 8, the AMOLED version the last month and a half or so, I guess now, the small version of that, because there is no small version of the other one. She's begrudgingly there, but I'd say like she just really wants her small MIP screen back. I honestly think she'll probably end up back on her Fenix 7S Pro.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I bet that'll happen in the next week or two.
No kidding. Okay, that's interesting. So in terms of the transition though, and this is leading us into the next watch that we're going to talk about here, but the transition from them kind of lumping in AMOLED into the Fenix 8 lineup, as well as killing off the small version of the Fenix 8, very fascinating, and we're going to have to see if that trend continues in the future, I guess you could say. Yeah. And which kind of brings us to the next watch kind of naturally, actually. So this is the Enduro 3 right here. So with the Enduro 3, so this isn't actually a Fenix 8 with a bigger battery in it. So this is actually more of a Fenix 7X Pro with a bigger battery in it. But I think, with the Enduro lineup, it's kind of been an interesting lineage in the past where they've kind of just been they've almost been like stripped down versions of their Fenix lineups where you can't really compare it with the Fenix 8 because, again, I think this is really a Fenix 7X Pro with a new UI. That's essentially it. Well, they actually did lighten this up quite a bit, just like the rest of the Enduro series as well. So in terms of like how big this watch is, it's actually a really, really comfortable watch just because of how light it is. And the battery life is amazing on this thing. And the biggest differences in terms of the solar technology, so both of these, the Fenix 7, the Fenix 8 solar as well as the Enduro 3 come with new solar technology that they have here, where the solar ring on the outside is actually completely black basically versus the red color that they had before. So it kind of blends into the case. So it actually is aesthetically a lot better, but they actually got rid of the little translucent layer that was on top as well, which I think the argument for that was that it's supposed to be more clear on top of there. Yeah. And I think it is. It's like, sure. But at the same time, putting that aside, the increased efficiency of this new solar technology is substantial though.
Right.
Completely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But probably the biggest item on this watch though is the price. The price dropped. So Garmin increased, the Garmin giveth and taketh, right? So they gave, or they cost more money than the Fenix, but this one dropped from the Enduro 3 was 1,000 or something. Yeah, something high. I'll put it on the screen, down to $899, right? Which
that's a good deal.
If you didn't care about the speaker bits on the Fenix 8, and you didn't care about diving, which is a lot of people, then this is your Fenix 8. This is the Fenix 8 that you wanted with the MIP-based screen, right? So again, if you were a MIP-based person anyways, this delivers on that. It's got more battery life than the Fenix 8 does, assuming you're all right with a larger size. It's got better solar. It's still got your MIP-based screen, and it's $200 or $300 cheaper, right? So like that's what was so weird to me, is that I think they were so focused on those other things that they just missed a lot of the core audience there.
Yeah, no, I did a recent Fenix 8 solar versus Enduro 3 video, and it was astounding to me in the comments how many fans there were of the Enduro 3 and how much they just absolutely loved the watch, and they saved $300 too. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, again, just like Ray said, my recommendation, it's like really assess if you need the speaker and microphone as well as the dive functionality. If not, get the Enduro 3. It's a really, really good deal for the money. So kind of a little bit on the other end of the coin here, though, is the new Fenix E. You're just gonna look away?
I'm just gonna leave.
So the Fenix E, simply put, so this is basically the original Epix Gen 2 that came out like 3-4 years ago, at least 3, if not 4 years ago, with their new UI. That's it. So.
But not having the new optical heart rate sensor, so you don't get the new ECG of even an Epix Pro or a Fenix 7 Pro, let alone the Fenix 8.
It is. Yeah, I mean, it's so the challenging thing about this watch, I think, ultimately, is the fact that Garmin's been selling the Epix Gen 2 at some hilariously low prices. I think all the way down to
$399 right now for an Epix Gen 2 with the sapphire titanium. So with the higher end materials, with the multi-band, like everything, it's half the price of this.
I've noticed I have noticed it actually does differ between regions a little bit from like 4 to 5, but it's still cheaper than this watch right here. So
still half the price.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, so Garmin definitely they've been kind of milking the Epix Gen 2 kind of factory where they kind of just keep on pulling a lever and just keep on producing Epix Gen 2s. And I think this very much is, I think, once they finally run out of Epix Gen 2,
which is what did they keep making them?
So funny. Well, and that's really, I mean, that's really maybe the excuse for this watch, is that it's like they'll slowly just phase that out to have this watch right here. So
yeah, I just don't get it. Like, I feel like someone, we've talked about this in the podcast, right? I feel like someone told Garmin, some retailer, the Best Buy or something in the world, not maybe Best Buy, but that sort of thing, told them we need a cheaper Fenix. And then Garmin said, okay, we'll make a cheaper Fenix. And they made this, and it's cheaper, but it's just a trick, right? Like
it's having a new watch out there that's not a previous model. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Garmin cannot resist putting their devices on sale during the holidays or otherwise, right? Like, even setting aside the holiday $399s right now or $449s, the Epix Gen 2 is at most $500 for the sapphire, titanium, etc. editions, right? So it's like, there's no logical scenario to buy that watch paying an extra $300 to $400 more for a new UI that is arguably not super awesome in everyone's mind. I mean, I'm sure there's someone at Garmin that likes that new UI more than existing UI, and maybe even like 2 or 3 people out in the real world. But I don't see that new UI as a reason to pay $300 or $400 more.
Definitely not.
And arguably, some might say they prefer it without it, right? So,
yeah,
I don't get that watch.
I mean, yeah. So my recommendation with this watch really for this year is, I think that would probably really only buy it on sale, but realistically, buy a Epix Gen 2 Pro.
Exactly.
Yeah,
on sale.
Yeah,
which
on
is
sale.
$5 something right now.
It's like whatever, like maybe $600 to $700. It's arguably going to be around the same price as this, and you're going to get a more capable watch at that point.
It's $550, $549 right now.
It very well.
Super low. I mean, so yeah, I think the only thing that would salvage the Fenix E is ECG. If they put the newer sensor in there at that price point, then you would have had a logical tiering of older gen stuff for super cheap. And then this, if you want ECG, which there are people that want and will pay extra for that feature. And then from there, you step up to the Fenix 8.
Yep.
And that to me was the decision that I think caused that to be a problematic.
Yeah. So a little bit of a confusing one for sure. A little bit perplexing to come out with. So the next one, so this is going to be pretty easy. So this is the new Apple Watch Ultra 2 in black.
Okay, next.
Okay, we'll spend a little more time with this because last year, they came out with the Apple Watch Ultra 2. It had like, the double tap and, more like internal upgrades. But, I think the most surprising thing is that we didn't get a different color last year. That was really and they came out with this color this year. So as much as it's a different color, they certainly talked about the technology that they, kind of put into this, where this is, it was a little bit confusing where they called it a diamond-like PVC or PVD coating, which is a little bit counterintuitive because there are 2 different processes there. So either way, it's supposed to have diamond-like characteristics, but the PVD processes is basically them kind of like bonding a carbon-like material to it. So anyways, that's the gist of it. But it is supposed to be highly scratch resistant. So I'm not sure. Did you see Jerry Rig Everything's video on it? So from his standpoint, it didn't look bad. I mean, with any of these watches, like I don't know, I'll put some B-roll of my Epix Gen, or I'm sorry, my Epix Pro that I have used for a long time on the screen right now, and it's got some marks of love on it for sure. So so this is the one I've been using right here, and mine looks pretty darn good. I haven't been doing like crazy rugged activities with it, admittedly. So I will admit that I haven't really put it through the ringer quite yet. How does yours look, though?
I have beaten the crap out of mine.
Okay.
And so I have had this on my wrist since within a couple hours of the announcement, right? So it's announced been, what, 3 or so months. Here, I have done long ultra trail hikes. I have been in the mountains. I have been wearing it. I've been in the pool, in the ocean, swimming, all this stuff every day doing something. And I was just like trying to see if there's any scratches at all. I don't think there's a single scratch on it. And I have hit this all over all sorts of rocks.
Yeah.
And it's impressive. And it's funny because on one of my initial videos with this, there was like a piece of like tree fuzz. So I was filming outside
Yeah.
and everyone's like, see, there's a scratch there. And I'm like, you can see the later tidbits in the video showing the timestamp on the watch being later with not the scratch. There's no scratch because it was just like literally fuzz floating around, right? That's true of a lot of our shots where it's with really, bright studio lights and close-up cameras that
Reflections and all that.
there's also things that aren't scratched. Right now, I don't believe, looking at this, I can see a single scratch on this case in any way, shape, or form. Maybe top a little bit. It just looks like muck there. Point is that from this distance, I can't notice anything.
Yeah.
So I think they've done a good job there. Whereas my existing Apple Watch 2 Ultra is way more scratch looking than this one is.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
mine has got a lot more loved marks on it, and I have probably maybe we're on about the same. I don't know, but it's
Okay.
yeah, I think that's they've done a good job there. But I think the real story on this watch though is not the black color, but actually really watchOS 11, right?
Yeah.
And bringing in all of those features from a watchOS 11 standpoint, and that included everything from kind of a little bit deeper navigation. But as we talked about earlier on in the Samsung discussion, there, the navigation still falls, I think, fairly short of what people wanted here. I feel like that was one that might have been a stretch goal for Apple to include in watchOS 11, but just sort of had to like stop short. And the main thing that the Apple's lacking is that you can't pull in routes from a third-party provider, from Strava routes, from Komoot, etc. You have to go ahead and create it within Apple Maps. And where that's challenging, so you live in the US, I live in Europe, and now in Spain in particular, is that in the US, they have what's called enhanced map, and that's also true of Japan, oddly enough. Those are the only two countries that Apple has enhanced off-road maps for, if you will. And so if the trail doesn't show up for me in Apple Maps, I can't create a route. I can't manually override that and create a route. And so I try to do some hikes on a very popular trail that sees thousands of people a day across the location I live on. And I literally couldn't drag my way across it. I couldn't get more than 5K into this. This trail goes for 150 or something K, and I couldn't do that. So that was frustrating to me. And Apple's done a lot of good work with, for example, their training API to allow platforms to push that in, and some of their other APIs there, but that's not there yet for navigation. I'm hoping that's a watchOS 12 thing. I've got to believe that's like something that didn't quite fit in the bucket for watchOS 11, got kicked down the road. But they did add in a training load bits there.
Yep.
So we saw Apple add in basically the ability to see your training load. I'm not sure if you have that. Yeah, unlocked my
Mine's like in sleep mode right now.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
So they did add the ability to go ahead and see training load. There we go. There we go. I'm just nothing awkward about this at all. So you can see the training load there and see how it trends over time. I'm down this week going into the open house that we've had here yesterday. And you can see basically what percentage is it down. And then within that, you've also had to go ahead now and assign or automatically assigns each activity basically a load profile to it. And so at the end of every activity, you get this little questionnaire that basically says a rating of 1 to 9, 10. Yeah. What is the effort intensity, effort rating of that? And then you basically confirm what they suggest, or you can change it. And that then changes your training load. That's a bit of a difference from everyone else in that everyone else looks at your heart rate efforts and says, this is what you are, right?
Which is very traditional.
Very traditional, versus Apple just takes your rating and multiplies it by your time and says, and we're done.
Well, but at the same time, like it should automatically assign an effort rating for you, and that is going to be based on like intensity. However, it's not necessarily intensity over time because that's load. So there's some confusing bits there because effort truly is like about intensity, but training load or load is going to be about intensity times time. So, there's a little bit like some mental gymnastics you have to do there. It's like, because, in my mind, it's like, well, effort is not just my intensity, but effort in my mind also equals duration.
Totally. Yeah. So like it asked me, I did a VO2 max style test last Monday, right? It asked me after that, like, how was that? And it was like, well, that sucked, right? That was hard. But it was only hard for the last couple minutes of that test. The rest of the tests are just kind of ramping up. So it's like, what do I put down? Do I put like 9? Because obviously the failure point of that test is me being unable to continue any longer because I'm aerobically shot at that point, right? So you fly off the treadmill sort of thing. But on the flip side, like, that's different than doing a hour and a half long session of intervals that I don't see as 9 either, right? So it's really tough. And I think for some people, and there's studies that show in Apple, point these third-party studies that were well before Apple came along that showed that people are actually pretty good at predicting that overall, and that does align with normal training load bits there. I think for me though, I don't have any problem with all of that bits there. There are some really good reasons why that's actually valuable. One of them is hiking.
Yeah.
In the case of everyone else here, when you go out for a long hike, and I go out for a 10 or 12 hour hike, hiking pretty fast, but not super high heart rates, just like Z1 heart rates, right? But for 10 or 12 hours. Almost every other watch here will give me the same training load as a simple, moderate 5K run.
Yeah.
Like literally, I will go out for 12 hours and the Garmin will give me the exact same training load as a moderate, not hard, but moderate 5K run. Versus here, I can say, oh, that was actually a harder thing. And because of that intensity times duration bit there, it will actually correctly spike my training load. So that's really good. My only complaint is kind of going back to the Google Fitbit one. They show the training load, as does Garmin and others,
As an actual number.
a number. And I want to see a number on Apple because I want to know, like right now when it's low this week, how does that compare though to my overall lowness over the course of a year? And this is just the last 4 weeks worth versus I want to know that, okay, how does that compare to last spring, right? And I can't see that, so I can't see that number. And of course, Apple has that number, right? That's how they make the percentage that shows down 18% or whatever. I just wish that was there.
Yeah, no, I think these are going to be good foundational elements, I think, for Apple moving forward in the future. And that's the other part that they actually have too, is that they actually have a Vitals app as well, which is basically going to be, which, as the name implies, basically, it's tracking like certain vitals when you sleep. So it's like sleep duration. There's also going to be respiration rate, SpO2 for the regions that actually do allow SpO2 on these watches. And then there's some other metrics in there as well. But the one that doesn't include actually is HRV, which that's actually included with the Pixel watch. So again, it's like, I don't know. Apple in my mind, I think that these are great features for sure. But Apple in my mind, I'm not sure. I feel like they almost like try to overthink some things. Yeah. So that's where I think with these two, it's like, I think they could have used more traditional templates that we've had in the past and still kind of still adapted those to be easier to understand. But I think they almost simplified them too much with this. Yeah.
This makes it really hard to use.
Totally.
Yeah, which is funny because there's so many other features in this watch where they do give that data, right? All the running efficiency features, for example, right? Or even the metrics you just mentioned for the vitals give you exact numbers, right? And so like, I don't understand why this one they skipped out on it. It's like, just put it back, Apple. I know you have encode somewhere there. Just stick it back.
Exactly. So next up we have the Apple Watch Series 10. So I need to actually, no, this is your watch. I always in sleep mode. So the Apple Watch Series 10, so the big one with this, actually, no pun intended, is that it actually increased the case sizes on both the small as well as the large version. And the large version actually has the largest Apple Watch display ever. And technically that's true. It's by actual like surface area and pixels and stuff.
Including the Ultra, to be clear.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So like literally ever. So it's not like if you put them side by side, it's kind of hard to notice.
Compared to an Ultra side by side.
Yeah, exactly. But technically it absolutely is bigger. And again, if you put it next to a Series 9, that's where you certainly can see the difference there. So, that's one thing. But I think the other thing was that they actually made it a lot thinner. And I think it was like by 10 or 15%. It was quite a bit actually. And I think they put some effort into emphasizing that, but from a wearability standpoint, it makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the new display on the top there.
Mhm.
I like just the way it feels like it curves over the edge there.
Yeah.
Right? Like that just
Mhm.
looks really nice
Mhm.
to me. And you do definitely notice that bigger display compared to previous ones. And I feel like the optical illusion makes it feel like a bigger, I mean, I know it technically is, but like practically speaking, it's basically a wash.
Sure.
But compared to the Ultra, it feels so much bigger because of that optical illusion as it kind of spills out over the side, right? It almost feels like the bowl is too full and the display is just going off the side there like that. But but again, this is Apple's playbook of release a new version each year with minor, they'll probably be more moderate in this particular case for this watch. Updates have that new software for watchOS come not just to this watch, but all previous watches. The goal isn't to bring you from a Series 9 to a Series 10. I'm sure Apple would love that, but that's not their goal. Their goal is really to bring you from that, Series 4, 5, 6, maybe even a Series 7 or 8, if they're really lucky, but it's to bring you from those old watches and have a really good reason. If you've got a Series 4 or 5, this is a massive upgrade for you in every possible way, right? And that's their playbook, and they've become really, really successful at it over the years.
Yeah, I think I wasn't even Apple themselves even talking about like the possibility of not necessarily having like a new iPhone every single year now, because again, like it comes down to the expectation element of the technology is getting so good nowadays that it's going to be hard to have a completely new watch that's actually worth upgrading to every single year. So this watch, no, if you have a Series 9 or a Series 8, I think don't upgrade your watch.
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean Series 7 maybe, but yeah, Series 6 and before, oh, go for it. Like this is a really, really good watch. One other thing too that they improve with this display, you're talking about how it spills over. So this is actually what they call their new wide angle display as well. So this is where it's supposed to be significantly more readable at off angles. And you can definitely tell that in on the overhead shot here where that's really, really bright off angle. It's kind of interesting though. It's like that's very much the case, but in terms of the actual usefulness of that, it's kind of questionable in terms of like how useful that really is, because I think it's really gonna come down to like I think like how large the text is as well as the context in which you're using it.
Right. And a scenario for that is something like this, where I'm sitting here like this and be able to look straight down, like, and be able to see the watch face more easily anyways, than you otherwise would. And I think that certainly holds water there.
Yep, totally. So next up, so this is a very, very interesting watch here. So this is the Amazfit T Rex 3, and both of us are like on the home stretch of finishing our reviews on this watch right now. But this is a really, really interesting watch because, quite frankly, this offers a hilarious amount of features for the money. Like in terms of the feature list that it has here, I mean, it's got nearly everything. It really has quite a bit. So in terms of kind of like the big hitters, it has a lot of recovery,
Training readiness.
training readiness. It has offline maps with labels, which with labels, which I think is a big one.
A very efficient offline map downloader too. Like you can download small little sections. You don't have to download 16 gigs like some of their competitors, right? Like that's super practical.
There's free diving capabilities in here. There's route imports and route capabilities. Gosh, I mean, it really, really offers a lot for the money. But you kind of like look at the list of apps that it has here. And sorry, it's in red mode right now because it is really late at night when we're filming this right now. But it's got so many features on this
I got no red mode here.
Oh, you got no red mode. Okay.
I instead have sleep. Hold on, I'm turning off sleep so it's not so. There we go.
There you go. So, but yeah, in terms of the actual feature list that it has, it's got so much here, and I don't know. That's probably my only complaint about it is that it's almost overwhelming in terms of like it's kind of like hard to really grasp how much is in here and kind of make sense of a lot of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think there's also just a lot of like nuance. You probably saw me just scrolling through there. A lot of like polish that's missing. So as I was scrolling through there over the last 30 seconds, each tile that I did, it had to update the tile. So it didn't pre-render the tiles. And so it's always like you have to wait for it to go, oh, now we've filled that in, right? Now it's done.
Like first thing in the morning, like it takes a good minute to like fill some of those in.
Yep. So, it's tough. Like it has in some ways kind of vaguely similar to the Samsung watches where it checks a lot of feature lists, but then when push comes to shove in terms of using it, some of those things fall short, like the navigation, right? You can navigate, but it's the same like complete mess of having to send files over to the watch and import them in, and then once they're in, loading up the route. But if you want to change routes, you have to stop the workout, like and then pause it. Like it's a whole lot of wonkiness. The orientation of the map is only a certain direction, you can't change that. Like there's just a lot of little things that can I navigate a route better than a Apple Watch? Technically, yes, because I can choose any route I want, just a GPX file. Is it easier to get that route into your watch than an Apple Watch? No, because in that case, I can use Apple Maps and clearly tap the way through. It's just the finish and fit on this. People have compared it to a Fenix 8, for example, right?
Which is ridiculous.
No, it's not even close. It's nowhere in that same region. Like even navigation, again, to dig further on that, there is a million features in a Fenix 8 or even an Instinct for $299 for that matter, around navigation that are missing for this. This was do we have maps? Yes. Do we have basic navigation? Yes. Do we have anything else? No. And as always, it's not always about those big ticket features. For a lot of people, it's all the little features that they use all the time, around rerouting, around turning on and off, waypoints, around all that kind of stuff. That is why you sometimes buy watches from Suunto or from Garmin or from Polar, et cetera, COROS, that have all those like extra navigation type features along the way. That this doesn't.
Yeah, I think ultimately it really is about refinement on this watch. Again, like the checklist is enormous on this thing, but there's some other quirks like we were discussing how like power meter data. So another impressive thing about this watch is that it pairs with external sensors, which I really have to give it to this watch versus like a Google Pixel as well as Samsung here, where not just pairs with external heart rate sensors, but it also pairs with like power meters and a whole bunch of other sensors.
I was actually have a smart trainer pulled up on it too. Like,
yeah. So no, impressive there, but it doesn't necessarily transfer that power meter data over on your Strava exports. So yeah, there's some like again, like I think each one of those features, it needs some refinement. I think probably my biggest issue with it actually is that on the readiness side of things, those as well as like the sleep tracking and stuff like that. Very much like Samsung's have done for me at least, is that it's very capped on each end, where like I can have a terrible night of sleep and it'll give me like a 65, and if I have a great night, it'll give me like a 85. And like I have some like it's like we can stay up like very late at night having like 3-hour nights just because we're editing and stuff like that, and it'll still give me like a 65. I'm like, that's not really true
versus Garmin on trading readiness.
Oh yeah,
you'll have a couple hours of sleep, it's like YOLO 1, right? I'm giving you 1 right now. It's how low you are on the scale. I can give you 0, but I can't, so I'm giving you 1, right? And I think even more than that, like on mine, I had problems for the first week or two where it was not recording sleep data at all.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's actually true.
I was still getting readiness scores, right? Oh, yeah. In the 50s and 60s, and I'm like, but I didn't sleep according to you, and I'm still getting scores. Like there's some weird quirks there that
you have to question a bit.
Yeah, like I feel like they're getting better. Like the T Rex is getting better with each version for sure. But it's that refinement. And one of the complaints about Amazfit over the years has always been that they don't typically solve those software problems for existing owners. They just release a new piece of hardware each year, right?
Yeah.
And that also somewhat applies to Garmin as well in some cases where people will complain. But generally speaking, Garmin will fix those software things in that first 1 to 2 years the watch is around before dropping it.
Yeah.
Versus Amazfit is like, we give you 12 months and that's it.
Yep.
Right. And that's a tough pill to swallow.
And I think the last piece about that refinement as well is about the, kind of industrial design around these too, is that, so they do have some like more cleaner looking watches, like I believe the Balance as well as like the Cheetah Pro, but with their more rugged focused watches, they're certainly loud watches. I mean, they're out there for sure. And we mentioned this in the podcast as well, but I did have this comment on the Amazfit Falcon that I reviewed. I can't remember when I reviewed that. It was either last year or earlier this year or something like that. But the comment, and this is not me saying this, but the comment said basically that they asked a 10-year-old kid, it's like, okay, draw me a picture of a Garmin Fenix. And that's what they drew. And, I'm sorry, again, like that was not my comment, but I was like, well, I can kind of get that. No offense, but I think the design, it sure is rugged looking, but I don't necessarily think you need to go this obvious with something like this.
Be a little more subtle.
Yeah.
I will give them credit though. Battery life is on point. Like
It's really, really
it's
good.
really good.
Yeah.
Like I've been charging like once a week. It's been
Yeah.
strong for an AMOLED display watch.
Yeah.
Solid.
So yeah, I mean, with Amazfit, I think this is a great deal for the money. It's not like a Garmin Fenix killer or anything like that. I think it's gonna be more comparable to probably like the offerings of something like a Suunto or a Polar or a
That's weird though, because like refinement wise, I think Suunto and Polar are more refined. Yeah, it's tough. It's just a really tough thing to compare to. We talked about this on the podcast as well. Like you have to figure out what you want out of a watch and figure out if that fits precisely in that little bucket, right? Like if you want a rugged watch with lots of features, you almost go more instinct, right?
Yeah.
That's not AMOLED, of course. So then you're like, well, I'm back here for an AMOLED display. And then you're like, okay, what else do I want? And it's weird, like, I don't know. You have a big matrix to figure that one out.
Yeah. So I think here's the thing. Again, this offers a lot for the money. And I think that companies like Polar and COROS and Suunto should be worried in like a year to 2 years.
Totally. Absolutely.
For Amazfit, because they are on the right track for sure.
Yeah.
With this watch, like absolutely for sure. So
yeah, I see them in a lot of ways very similar to COROS. Like I see them as a copying a lot of COROS's moves from the past, and I could see them kind of following that similar playbook going forward.
Well, it's almost like it's almost a little bit opposite, where I think COROS, like they kind of they entered it more on that, more like the Pace series and stuff like that, and the Apex series, where those are like really, really killer values for the money, right? And these are too, but they didn't necessarily like offer like every feature under the sun, where these guys are.
Right.
And so again, it's like it just takes refinement, and then I think those other companies need to be worried about it. So for now, next up, we alluded to this watch earlier at the beginning of the year. So this is the new Garmin Lily 2 Active. And first of all, they could have very well called this the Lily 3. Yeah,
Totally.
Completely. So, where the Lily 2, that was like, oh, okay, yeah, these are certainly some nice changes over the original Lily. This is the Lily that you should get. Like, I mean, hands down. And I think the Lily that people really, really wanted overall. Yeah. So they actually increased the size yet once again, from the Lily, original Lily to the Lily 2 to the Lily 3. So this is a little bit larger, but it's still a very svelte watch for sure.
Yeah.
So quite a few things on here. I mean, really quite a few things. I think the first thing are going to be that there's some real buttons on the side there.
Yeah, buttons are where it's at.
Real buttons. The increases case size as well, so you actually have the standard Garmin charger as well, so you don't have the clip-on charger. Yeah. There's longer battery life, and then I think from the capability standpoint, it got so much more capable because now it has built-in GPS.
Yep.
But in addition to that, the sport profile list increased significantly, and you don't have to. There was this thing about with some of Garmin's more like hybrid smartwatches. There was the thing where you kind of had to manage your sport profiles on the app, where it was you could only have like 6 on the watch at one time and stuff like that. Where if you had like 6 profiles on there and you had like, let's say, I don't know, the elliptical or something like that wasn't on the list, well, you'd have to have your phone to actually switch that out. And that's a pain in the butt. Yeah. So with this, you can actually do all that on the watch itself. This is a great, I can't recommend this watch enough, actually,
totally.
Especially considering the upgrades from the Lily 2, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think I'm confused that we both were, why they just didn't call it the Lily 3.
Yeah.
This is it's such a much better deal in every possible respect. Obviously it's a little bit bigger, but I don't think most people would notice the difference between these two without like literally seeing them side by side and being, oh, that's a couple millimeters wider, right? But like this is so much more capable, and it achieves that same look. Otherwise, it's a great little unit.
When I think the nice thing about this watch too here is that it's not necessarily a watch that you would necessarily have to do double duty with another watch. Yeah. This watch right here really crosses that bridge between two watches, where you could actually use this for a lot of different sports, where with the Lily 2, that was kind of tough to do.
Right. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. So cool. So yeah, that's the Lily 2. Home stretch, we have the Polar Vantage M3. So just like the Grit X2 Pro was exactly a Polar Vantage V3, but in just a more durable case, this is the exact opposite, I guess you could say, where they're kind of like trimming that down. So this is the same exact software features as the Grit X2 Pro as well as the Vantage V3, just in a smaller case, but I think most importantly, a much smaller price tag. So I think we gave Polar a hard time about the price on the Grit X2 Pro as well as the Vantage V3, but this has a very reasonable price of $399, which I think hits the mark pretty darn well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close. I think, granted, they then got kind of slightly sideswiped by the next watch here just days later at a lower price point. But I think they're in the general ballpark, right? And so, one could quibble and say probably $349 might be a better and more competitive price point. But I think the materials are more premium here than what we see on the COROS side over there. We'll talk about in a second. The issue with this watch is not this watch unto itself. It is the fact that this watch came out almost identically a year later from the Polar Vantage V3, almost to the day. And then in between that, halfway down the middle, we had the Grid X2 Pro. And then from a feature standpoint, there were no new features on this watch, right? I mean, maybe some UI tweak or something, but no meaningful sport features. Kind of similar to talk about on the Garmin side, but in this case, this was nothing new. And so you sit there and go let's just say at worst 6 to 8 months later, what have the software developers been doing? I know that sounds rude, but the competitive name to this entire game is software features.
Yeah.
Like it or not, that's the reality.
Yeah.
And so, it just simply shrinking it down and putting cheaper materials does not work anymore. It does not work. And so, Polar announced a few features that are coming in Q1 of 2025. And I look at that list and there's things like Find My Phone, right? And they're very minor little features. I'm going, that is not cutting it. And that's coming out, in somewhere between
couple months after this.
Yeah, between 2 and 5 months later, depending on how you define Q1.
Yeah.
And so now you're talking a year later for this watch back here, having basically a handful of tiny little features as opposed to big ticket features. Features that I would be looking at Polar going, where is outdoor track mode? Where is a Climb Pro equivalency? Where is more labels and stuff like that on the map? It's just one of the features they are bringing, next year. But there just needs to be more, especially if their goal is to have the 3 watches be on the same platform. They need to deliver. That's the whole point of that, is to make it easier, right? Is to make it so that it's we're developing one OS, kind of vaguely like Apple, but one OS, and we can do it very quickly so we can do new features. It's just got to happen.
They've had opportunities, I think, with the Grid X2 Pro as well as this, where, I think they could have done a big feature drop alongside it and say, oh yeah, this is actually coming back to the V3 as well. And, I think they were attempting to do that, I think, with the M3, with the 3.0 firmware update that's supposed to launch early next year,
right,
in 2025. But again, it's it's a 3.0 update, but it's challenging to me to call it a completely a 2.0 to a 3.0, considering the list of features that it has there. So
and that updates what COROS and Suunto and
do on a quarterly basis,
if that, right?
Sure.
even more frequent than that sometimes, right? That's it's not a yearly update sort of sweep. It certainly would compare to Apple's yearly update or even Samsung's update or Google's update. It's and I know we're harping on this, but I feel like Polar, financially, one can look at their public financials and see they're in a precarious position right now. And so they've got to find ways to get out of that position. And I think, going to a single platform, awesome. That's one of those ways. Offering multi-price point watches, setting aside the price point of this one over here being off, in my mind anyways, that's the right strategy. But the key to those strategies is to have those features at a COROS-like pace, or even a Garmin quarterly update-like pace, right? To really keep moving there.
Yep. So I think big opportunities for Polar coming next year. So I think we, again, mentioned in the podcast, but, dumping a lot of resources into their software development side of things, I think is going to be really, really big for sure. So a lot of opportunities there. All right, so last up, and I don't know, I think this is appropriate maybe for the last watch of the year, because I personally thought this was a really great release. So this is the COROS Pace Pro. So I think, the biggest news per se, quote unquote, is that this is COROS's entry into the AMOLED world with their first AMOLED watch. So this is an interesting one because they kind of split the difference between their Apex series as well as their Pace series, where the Pace 3 and the Pace series in general has been a really, really great budget offering just tons of features for the money. And then this watch right here, it's not just about slapping AMOLED into it, but it was kind of crossing that bridge where this also had maps. And then one more thing is that, and this is kind of a funny thing because their marketing behind this watch was that, it was kind of like their fastest watch ever. And I literally asked them like, fastest watch ever, what exactly does that mean? And they're like, just in terms of like getting around the device and stuff like that. And it actually certainly is the case. So I know we chatted about this quite a bit. So I guess we'll talk about the speed here in a second. But what are your overall thoughts about this watch?
I think it's one of the better watches COROS has ever made, in terms of not just the features, the design, the UI side of it. It's like a plastic case, but so is the Forerunner series, right? And so it doesn't bother me at all. The accuracy was good across the board for me. This is the very first COROS watch ever to have acceptable to good swim tracks, open water swim tracks. I've all their previous watches, including this one over here, has had proper dumpster fire swim tracks, and this was the first one where it actually completed the swim multiple times. So that was good. I think they're on the right track here.
Yeah. So going back to the whole speediness of this watch. So one of the big features of this watch, other than the fact that it has an AMOLED display, is that it actually also has the offline maps that come with their higher end watches. And using their maps with their higher end watches, it's kind of like that loading bar, on the screen where you're just like,
yeah, not fast.
This thing's blazing fast. This is probably one of the fastest map moving, panning, browsing experiences on the market. I mean, granted, it's not the level of map detail that you're getting on a Fenix device, so there's less information to actually process on the screen. However, still, it's a really, really good experience.
Yeah, no, it's super smooth, really well executed, and yeah, battery life is very, very strong as well. Like it's a good watch overall. I have very few complaints about that watch.
Well, and I think the other thing too is we have to talk about the price too. So this is kind of an interesting one because again, the Pace offering that was like it was offering like a lot for the $200 to $230 price, the range that these were at. So this jumped considerably to $350. So there were some comments, at least in my video, about like some complaints about the pricing. But again, you're adding offline maps to this, which that's really, really big. So it's not necessarily just the AMOLED display. So comparatively, in terms of features, this compares really well to a lot of other watches in the marketplace. Like let's say like a Suunto Race S out there as well.
Suunto Race S, the Polar Vantage M3, the Garmin Forerunner 265, though that is, we got slight differences there as well.
That's a tough one, yeah.
It's a tough one in a way because there are differences. Like that doesn't have mapping, but that has a lot more
physiological
features, training features that are better executed than Polar. Polar has them on paper, COROS, COROS has them on paper, but they're not as well executed as what Garmin is doing in that training load recovery, training readiness realm and stuff like that. So that's a weird one there because you lose the maps on the Garmin side when you gain the other stuff and you decide what's worthwhile to you, sort of thing, right? And what's more interesting about this, though, is the fact that it completely undercuts their Apex series.
Right? There's no reason to buy an Apex at all at this point.
Not even close. I mean, the Apex series was already struggle busing when it came to pricing against their competitors, and this just completely sideswipes it. Like there is a handful of tiny features, I think around climbing, for example, that the Apex series retains, Apex Pro retains, but otherwise it's like,
I mean, durability, I mean, if you are looking for durability, that could be an issue with this watch for sure. And that's a reason to get the Apex series. But other than that, I mean, capability wise, this is an amazing watch. But I think, I don't know, it's kind of interesting that this is the end of the year because I think this is a great segue into what we're going to see next year though, because, being that this is COROS's first AMOLED watch, and from what I've been seeing already, it's been getting a really, really good reception. And again, even from our perspectives, we really, really like this watch. So I would have to see an AMOLED something else next year from COROS.
I mean, I think if they don't have an AMOLED Vertix next year, that would in my mind be missing the boat.
Oh, completely.
Like that would be like they watch the cruise ship go off in the distance, and you're like, oh, see COROS. It's I mean, you have to, right? Like, I know there's obviously the MIP versus AMOLED discussion, and COROS has said, they said very publicly in their call that this is not the end of MIP displays for them.
No.
And I think that's the case for a while, right? But eventually it'll be end of MIP displays. That's just a factual reality here for these companies at some point, whether that's in 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years or something, who knows? But eventually that'll happen. as efficiency gains and stuff like that happen to other display types, perhaps micro LED, perhaps who knows what, right? So, but this Vertix needs an AMOLED version. And I think that would help COROS from a pricing standpoint, right? So COROS has always really struggled in this Vertix category when they're compared against Garmin's previous gen Fenix series watches, right? So like right now, this is a more expensive watch, the Vertix 2S, than an Fenix 7 Pro on current sale, right? And a Fenix an Epix Pro on current sale, let alone the Epix Gen 2 that we talked about earlier on, right? And so that's where I think if COROS can get an AMOLED display there and add a couple of features, I would love to see a Climb Pro-like equivalency come from COROS. That would really make that competition with those Garmin watches more viable at COROS's current price points.
Yeah.
Where I think they need to be very careful, though, is not to pull a Garmin, if you will, on pricing, in the sense that I think if COROS takes their existing Vertix, throws an AMOLED display in there, and then increases the price, that's asking for trouble, right? To me, that's really going to be challenging, especially knowing that MIP-based displays for companies are more expensive than AMOLED displays.
Well, and they're going to be getting more expensive because they're going to be producing less of them.
Right.
Yeah. So
like their price, I mean, if COROS puts an AMOLED display in a Vertix, from a pure bill of materials standpoint, that watch price should go down, right? Like, actually speaking, those displays are cheaper. So that's where I am rooting for a really solid, well-executed AMOLED Vertix in next year from COROS.
I think there still can be a place for every single one of these, or not every single one of these companies, but probably more of the more outdoor-focused sports companies to have an MIP watch out there. You know, it's like that's going to be the Enduro 3 right here. It's like maybe for Suunto that's going to be the Vertical or something along those lines. But and you know, COROS I think is again the last holdout. And I mean they've told us and they've told they say publicly that battery life is a really big consideration for them. So so memory pixel, I would anticipate COROS having a memory pixel watch for quite some time. However, based on you kind of have to read the room here. It's like everything's kind of going AMOLED.
Right. Especially as companies get more and more efficient with their AMOLED displays and how they use them and the efficiency under the covers and adding bigger batteries. Like Garmin talked about that with their AMOLED watches, that because of the way the bonding is between the touchscreen layer and the solar layer and everything else, they can actually fit a bigger battery into an AMOLED device, which then goes and compensates for the fact that it's draining faster, that it gets almost equivalent numbers on some of those GPS modes there. When we've seen that with the Fenix E, right? Side by side on certain modes, it's basically a wash, right? In other modes, then it does better. And obviously for 24/7 mode, that's where you see the biggest gains there for people that don't use this as a sports watch every day, but use it more as a long battery life watch.
Sure. Yeah. So I think another thing that's going to be interesting for next year really is going to be, again, like we talked about this trend of like, are they going to be actually doing like S upgrades every year or not? So I think it's going to be pretty interesting. From the Apple Watch side of things, I mean, we talked about the Apple Watch Ultra 2 Black, that this is just a black version of the original Apple Watch Ultra 2. I would have to imagine that there's going to be an actual Ultra 3 next year. That just, so what that entails, we have no idea. But again, on the software side of things, that's going to be the story with so many of these watches here too. So I think we talked about it earlier with the Pixel Watch. There's a lot of opportunity for maybe a little more rugged version or more unique version looking of the Pixel Watch. But yeah, software wise, I think that's really going to be the thing to look for with a lot of these watches, and not just necessarily ticking off those features, but again, how they execute them.
I think 2025 will be the year of mapping and navigation for all the players. Right? Like I think we look at the experience of mapping and navigation on a Suunto, Polar, and COROS watches are vaguely similar in the same ballpark, right? In terms of the quality levels on the labels, for example, and the detail levels and labels is certainly behind what we see from Garmin, for example, in the mapping details there. I mean, we've seen both Polar and Suunto announce increased mapping capabilities coming in 2025. I think COROS did as well, also talked about some of the labeling coming up next year as well. So all those companies are on the bandwagon of how they improve their mapping experience. I think we're going to see the same from Apple. And I've got to believe Google's looking around the room and saying, okay, Apple did stuff with navigation last year. Samsung keeps kind of circling that navigation realm for a while. I've got to wonder if Google's going to jump in that boat as well. So I kind of look across the room and go, That's the easiest gains area all these companies can make, both the maps as well as the navigation experience.
Yep. So yeah, I think so. That's really something to look for. I mean, a lot of us, we certainly buy a watch, I think probably for, I mean, the look is probably going to be a big part of it, right? Just because it is living on your wrist, 24/7. But, the other part to really look for is what they offer in terms of software and how they support that software moving forward. Because I think, again, like that's where, like maybe with the Amazfit argument, it's like, you have to look at like how well they actually support those devices years down the road.
Right. So then the big bet of the year, will we see Garmin and some of the premium devices bring back cellular?
Oh boy, that's like, you're talking like that's a we've seen cellular implemented on some of their watches before in the past. But
On the kids' watches, the Bounce series, as well as their Venue, or probably View Active, I think it was 3 years ago.
Okay, so I'm gonna say
And Forerunner 945 LTE.
that's true. That's true. We haven't heard from them on the cellular side of things in a long time. I would say yes, but I think the question in my mind is going to be battery life.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, as well. I think they have to. I think, if there was nothing else that the feedback from the Fenix H delivered to them was that, again, people would have accepted this price point. Existing people, right? Obviously, there's new people buying the Fenix 8 all day long, but people would have accepted this price point more with cellular built in at that price.
Sure.
Right? That would have been an easy, like, the conversation would have changed entirely. And I know there are people that are going to want Apple and Samsung and Google like cellular functionality with, completely integrated number integration, all that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen on the Garmin side because of the rules that Apple has, and primarily Apple has around how they control that ecosystem for the companies. Garmin can't get iMessages on a Garmin watch with that same number. It's simply not going to happen. And so due to that, I think we're going to see similar functionality what Garmin does on their Bounce series watches for kids and their 945 LTE, which is really focused on that safety element, if you will, right? And the tracking and that whole bit there, and making that as clean as possible within the boundary they can work within. I know I'm already hearing people go, well, they could do more on the Android side, and they could. But again, factually speaking, the majority of Garmin's market share for these types of high-end watches are coming from iOS users.
Sure.
Right? So like that's the way that it's not about a gold market share, it's about who's buying these watches, and that is iOS. So they have to live within those boundaries. And I don't think Garmin's going to go down the road of having a different experience, meaningfully different experience for Android versus iOS, right? Like they do that in minor ways. Like, for example, you can get pictures if you pair this to a Android watch.
Yep.
And you can respond to text messages, and that's about it, right?
Yeah, it is about it.
Yeah. So I think I agree with you. I think we're going to see that at some point. Where we see that is the biggest question. So do we see it on a next gen Venue, a next gen Forerunner, or a next gen Fenix?
Yeah,
that's the real question. Yep. Right. Where will they jump first?
So just speaking of iOS and iPhones, counter bet for you is Apple Watches. Do you think we'll see double the battery life?
Oh, that's asking Apple. One day is all you ever want. I think it depends on, obviously only Apple knows about their internal sales figures, to be honest, right? Like, and I have no idea whether or not these met their expectations or exceeded their expectations. But in my mind, if you are falling short of expectations, and again, I have no idea if they are or aren't, but if they were falling short of expectations, the easiest way to exceed those expectations in 2025 is to double your battery life without meaningfully changing the case size, right? I mean, if you walk on the street, walk into an airport, walk whatever venue you want to, and ask what an Apple Watch user wants, they will only say one thing every single time: more battery life.
Yep. I have many friends who use Apple Watches who are, everyone from my mom who does, just goes on hikes and stuff like that to some, full blown marathon runners. And that's the one thing that they want.
Yeah. Even me last night, like wearing this, right? Like I get 2 days out of this pretty consistently. But last night before bed, I took it off to put it on the charger for what I assumed to be just 20, 30 minutes, enough to get through the night. And of course I forgot, which means I don't have sleep data for today, or I can't see my trending data for today. Like, I just want battery life. That's it. I just want I want 6 days, but give me like 4 or 5 days on the Ultra, which would be in line with their competitors in those same case factors, right? And Apple's obviously chosen time and time again to invest those processor gains back into, or invest those battery gains back into the processors, back into the processing, et cetera. And we have to believe in 2025, they're going to put AI something in those watches, right? No. And that will, of course, chew more battery life as well. And maybe that's the bet they go for, because if we look at all of the Apple AI features in 2024, none of them touch the watch whatsoever. They were very open about that this is not, there's no Apple AI anything in the watch. It's all their other devices. And this will be kind of like the last device standing sort of thing.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, I think it is going to be a very, very interesting year in 2025. I think this was a really, really great year actually for so many companies. So again, I think we're going to see many, many great things next year. Anyways, I think we'll have to see if those features are actually going to be compelling for you to actually upgrade from this year's watch to next year's watch. But again, you don't necessarily have to. It's not one of those things. So it's always nice to. So anyways, I think that's going to do it for this year's 2024 Sportswatch Year in Review. Again, like a reminder about the FitFile podcast. That was kind of the evolution of this Sportswatch Year in Review. So go ahead and check that out. We'll have that link down in the description below where you can get more sports tech goodness just like this. Anything else? Any last words for this year's Sportswatch Year in Review? Pardon me.
No, I think this was, like you said, a strong year. Looking forward to 2025.
Yep. All right. Thanks, folks.
Thanks. Have a good one.